They said he bought it to save journalism, that it was a philanthropic gesture. But what if the truth is simpler and far more strategic? In 2013, Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, spent $250 million to quietly acquire one of the most influential newspapers in the world, The Washington Post. No boardroom drama, no media circus, just one signature, and the headlines were his. But here's what rarely gets mentioned. From the moment Bezos took control, everything around the story became flexible. Scrutiny, perception, even political momentum. Today, you'll see how this wasn't just a media deal. It was a shift in influence, one that's still shaping what you read, what you think, and what you never question. The newsroom had no warning. On an ordinary August morning in 2013, The Washington Post, the paper that had helped take down Nixon, exposed CIA secrets, and shaped generations of political thinking, announced it had been sold. No leaks, no rumors, just a line in the newsfeed and silence across the desks. The buyer wasn't a media tycoon. He wasn't a legacy publisher. He was Jeff Bezos. To the public, it sounded surreal. The richest man in the world buying a struggling newspaper that hadn't turned a real profit in years. No previous interest in journalism, no media experience, no clear reason. And that's exactly why it felt off. Officially, it was framed as an act of preservation, a gift to democracy. Bezos said he would ensure the Post's independence, that he wouldn't interfere with editorial direction. His tone was calm, his promises reassuring, but the timing raised eyebrows. Just months earlier, Amazon had begun attracting serious attention in Washington. Antitrust murmurs were turning into official hearings. Lawmakers were beginning to ask whether Amazon had grown too big, too fast, and too untouchable. And now, the man running that empire owned the paper those same lawmakers read every single day. Some called it brilliant, others called it dangerous. What few called it was random. Insiders described the deal as unusually fast and unusually quiet. There were no public negotiations, no competitive bidding, no time for questions. Even veteran journalists were caught off guard. And in an industry addicted to leaks and gossip, the silence was telling. But Bezos didn't walk into the newsroom with orders. He didn't rewrite headlines or fire editors. He didn't need to. Because what he acquired wasn't a newspaper. It was access to power, to narrative, to influence with a reach that didn't look like lobbying, but worked even better. The Post continued to operate independently, or so it seemed. No scandals, no obvious shifts, but something changed, subtly. Reporters described an atmosphere of caution. Editors noticed where the spotlight pointed, and where it didn't. Coverage of Amazon remained professional, but often curiously soft. Other giants were critiqued sharply, Amazon less so. Coincidence? Maybe. But in media, what isn't covered speaks louder than what is. Behind the scenes, Amazon's antitrust pressure eased. Bezos began appearing in photos with senators, at summits, on charity boards. He became more than a tech mogul. He became an institution. And the Post? It became part of that infrastructure, a pillar of perception. From the outside, it looked like generosity, a billionaire saving an endangered paper. But from the inside, it looked more like insulation, a buffer between one of the world's most powerful men and the public narrative that could threaten him. This wasn't about headlines. It was about control. The kind you don't need to demand, the kind that arrives quietly in a box marked philanthropy and stays just long enough to change how the world sees you. It wasn't just about shielding Amazon. It was about rewriting how influence works, quietly, legally, and permanently. And what started with one newspaper wouldn't stop there. The Washington Post wasn't just a media outlet, it was a data engine. Under Bezos, the paper didn't just publish articles, it began optimizing them for clicks, for shares, for behavioral triggers. Its digital infrastructure was rebuilt from the ground up, guided by Amazon-style thinking. Track everything, analyze everything, personalize everything. And behind the scenes, a silent transformation began. Each article became a signal, each reader a data point, each pattern a predictive tool. Not to sell ads, but to understand how information flows through belief. Because when you know what people react to, you know what to show, what to emphasize, and more importantly, what to bury. The Post started testing headlines in real time, running A/B experiments on public perception, measuring which phrases created outrage, fear, sympathy, or silence. It was no longer just journalism. It was emotional engineering at scale. And with that came something even more powerful: control over timing. Not just what stories were told, but when. What appeared on the front page the day antitrust bills were announced? Which topics trended when Amazon faced criticism? Which narratives quietly vanished when they no longer served a purpose? This wasn't censorship, it was calibration. No one needed to issue orders, because when you control the system that decides what's relevant, you don't have to say no. You just delay, deprioritize, redirect. That's what made it invisible, even to insiders. Staff still felt free, editors still felt independent, but the infrastructure had changed. The platform had evolved from outlet to interface, one that could map minds and shape momentum. And Bezos? He wasn't just observing, he was integrating. The Washington Post migrated to Amazon Web Services. Its digital operations linked into the same cloud that powered the CIA, Netflix, and most of the federal government. Every article clicked, every user tracked, every reaction logged. It wasn't surveillance, it was strategy. Because when you understand how millions of people emotionally respond to information in real time, you don't need to control the message. You just need to control the context. And that context was already expanding beyond the newsroom. Because this wasn't just about media. It was about something much bigger. Influence at scale. And the next move? It wouldn't be digital. It would be personal. Washington has rules, but they don't apply equally to everyone. When Bezos bought the Post, he didn't just acquire a media brand. He acquired a pass. A silent, unspoken pass to rooms that most CEOs never enter. Closed-door briefings, strategy dinners, private conversations where laws are born or buried. Before the purchase, Bezos was seen as a brilliant founder. After it, he became something else: a statesman, a figure of soft diplomacy, a man with a seat at the adult table of American power. Suddenly, Amazon wasn't just a company, it was a partner. Lobbyists noticed it, so did lawmakers. Media outlets began quoting the Post as a primary source in stories about Amazon without acknowledging the ownership link. The lines blurred, and that was the point. It wasn't about controlling articles, it was about controlling tone, positioning, access. When antitrust hearings intensified, Bezos appeared before Congress, but the questions were soft, the tone respectful. Meanwhile, the Post's coverage was balanced, analytical, even complimentary at times. No accusations, no headlines screaming monopoly, just complexity, nuance, ambiguity. And in Washington, ambiguity is a shield. At the same time, Bezos started showing up in different places: Policy forums, climate conferences, philanthropic councils. He wasn't lobbying, he was networking. The Post gave him more than narrative leverage. It gave him cultural currency. He wasn't just the richest man in the world. He was the man who saved the free press. And when you wear that mask, few dare question what's behind it. But while the surface looked noble, the structure behind it told a different story. Bezos increased his investments in data infrastructure, in defense contracting, in space. Amazon Web Services secured deals with the Pentagon. Blue Origin entered national security conversations. Everything he built, from commerce to cloud, was now threaded into the fabric of government operations. And at the center of that web was a man with a newspaper, one that could destroy reputations or protect them. This wasn't power by force, it was power by presence. And the deeper Bezos embedded himself in the system, the less visible the boundaries became. He didn't just get closer to Washington, he became part of it. And the Post? It was the perfect interface. But there was still one layer left to breach. Because influence over institutions is one thing, but influence over the individuals who run them, that's something else entirely. Institutions are made of people. But what happens when the system surrounding those people is no longer neutral? Bezos didn't need to control individuals directly. He just needed to build the platform they couldn't operate without. It started with Amazon Web Services, AWS. What began as a cloud computing solution soon became the invisible backbone of modern civilization. By the mid-2010s, AWS wasn't just powering startups and e-commerce. It was hosting banks, hospitals, intelligence agencies, government portals, and yes, media outlets, including the Washington Post. In 2014, just 1 year after Bezos bought the paper, the Post was fully migrated to AWS, the same infrastructure used by the Department of Defense, the same cloud used by the CIA. One man, one architecture, multiple layers of national function dependent on his servers. That's not conspiracy, that's contract. Bezos had built something no regulator could define and no competitor could replicate. Not just a company, an ecosystem. And inside that ecosystem, information didn't just move, it lived. Every click, every query, every article, ad, and algorithmic decision flowed through systems that reported to one source. And when that source also owns a major national newspaper, the distinction between communication and computation begins to dissolve. Suddenly, news wasn't just written, it was delivered through infrastructure owned by the subject of the news. Opinions were shaped inside platforms whose terms were invisible. And power stopped being a matter of headlines. It became a matter of uptime. If your government runs on AWS, and your media runs on AWS, and your elections depend on digital logistics that run on AWS, then what exactly isn't influenced by it? This was Bezos' real innovation. He didn't buy influence, he built it. He architected a system where access, visibility, and relevance could be adjusted, not by decree, but by design. No conflict of interest, no paper trail, just configuration. Inside this architecture, even the illusion of independence was preserved. The Washington Post kept its editorial walls. Government agencies kept their autonomy. But the pipes, the delivery systems, the technical skeleton beneath it all, that belonged to one man. And unlike traditional monopolies, oil, steel, railroads, this one wasn't visible. It couldn't be photographed. It couldn't be voted out. Because it wasn't a product. It was a protocol. A digital nervous system quietly wrapping itself around the most critical functions of society without the public ever realizing it. And that's what made it so effective. While other billionaires bought yachts or sports teams, Bezos built infrastructure, permanent, essential, inescapable. His influence didn't just sit on top of the system, it became the system. And the Post? That was just the user interface, the friendly front end to a much deeper operating layer. Because when you control information, you control belief. But when you control the systems that deliver that information, you control reality. And by the time anyone notices, it's already too late. There's a moment in every empire when control becomes invisible, not because it's hidden, but because it feels normal. That's what makes it dangerous. The Washington Post still publishes award-winning journalism. It still investigates corruption, challenges power, exposes fraud. But there are blind spots, places it doesn't go, stories it doesn't chase. And the public never sees what wasn't written. That's the brilliance and the threat of structural influence. You don't need to tell a newsroom what to avoid. You just build the walls high enough so they stop looking beyond them. Several former Post journalists off the record described a culture shift. Not censorship, just a new kind of caution. A quiet calibration of tone, especially when it came to stories involving Amazon, labor practices, or government contracts tied to AWS. Coverage wasn't absent, it was softened, framed in ways that dispersed heat instead of focusing it. Even opinion columns critical of Bezos were paired with soft disclaimers. Nuance became armor. And in a world built on outrage, silence is strategic. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, something else shifted. Regulatory momentum against Amazon stalled. Aggressive antitrust narratives gave way to broader tech accountability. And through it all, the Post remained respected, trusted, authoritative, even as its owner became the subject no one truly interrogated. That's the real price of truth. It doesn't vanish, it just gets priced out of reach, out of focus. And for a man like Bezos, that's not suppression, that's insulation. A layer of legitimacy between his empire and the questions that might unravel it. But this story isn't just about one man. It's about a model, a playbook, a blueprint for influence in the age of systems. Because Bezos didn't just buy a newspaper, he built a firewall between perception and accountability. And the question that remains isn't whether that firewall exists. The question is, who else is building theirs? In every era, power adapts. Once it marched with armies, then it negotiated through banks. Now it hides inside systems you don't see, code you can't read, contracts you'll never sign, and headlines that feel neutral until you realize what's missing. Jeff Bezos didn't need to control the media. He just needed to become the one thing no one in media could ignore. Essential, undefinable, everywhere. The Washington Post kept its reputation. Bezos kept his silence. And somewhere in the space between those two truths, accountability disappeared. There were no mandates, no memos, no edits from above. Just a quiet understanding. Some stories don't need to be told. Some questions don't need to be asked. And when your newsroom lives inside the infrastructure of your empire, no one needs to say a word. Because when you own the context, the content takes care of itself. This isn't about Bezos anymore. This is about the next one, and the one after that. Because what he built wasn't a one-time play, it was a template. Own the medium, control the platform, befriend the regulators. Redesign the narrative from the inside, not by force, but by presence. That's the new empire. No flags, no borders, just access, just perception. And the only thing more powerful than shaping the truth is deciding what never becomes truth in the first place. If this video reached you, if you felt it, it's because you're not looking where they want you to look. You're seeing the shadow behind the system. And if that matters to you, help this message go further than it was supposed to. Not with hype, but with signal. Leave a like, subscribe, and most importantly, share this with someone who still thinks the news is just news. Because the truth is no longer hidden. It's just out-prioritized by design. And now, you know.